The smell hit David Sanders before the smoke did, acrid chemical wrong. He was 3 blocks away from the Meridian Tower when his daughter Maya tugged at his hand, her small fingers tightening around his calloused palm. "Daddy, look," she whispered, pointing upward with her free hand, her pink backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. The sky above downtown had turned the color of ash and amber, a churning mass that didn't belong in the crisp October morning. David's body responded before his mind caught up, every muscle memory from another life flooding back through his veins. He could see the smoke billowing from the 23rd floor of the glass and steel monolith, dark plumes punching through shattered windows like angry fists. People were already gathering on the sidewalks, phones raised, documenting disaster with the detachment of spectators. But David wasn't looking at the building anymore. He was counting seconds, calculating oxygen levels, remembering the weight of gear he no longer wore and the brothers he'd left behind in another country, on another day when the sky had filled with smoke. "Maya, baby, I need you to do something for me," David said, kneeling down so they were eye to eye. His daughter's brown eyes, so much like her mother's, searched his face with a wisdom that shouldn't belong to a 7-year-old. She'd learned too early that when her father's voice got quiet like this, soft and steady, it meant something serious was happening. "See that coffee shop right there? The one with the blue awning." He pointed to the corner cafe where they sometimes shared muffins on Saturday mornings. "I need you to go inside and ask Mrs. Chun to call 911. Tell her there's a fire at the Meridian Tower. Can you do that for me?" Maya's lower lip trembled, but she nodded. "Where are you going?" "To help, sweetheart. Just like we talked about. Sometimes people need help, and if we can give it, we have to try," Maya finished, repeating the words he'd told her 100 times before. Words he'd learned in sandstorms and firefights, in moments when staying still meant watching someone die. She hugged him quickly, fiercely, her small arms tight around his neck, and then she was running toward the coffee shop, her backpack bouncing, her sneakers slapping against the pavement. David stood and moved toward the building. Around him, the crowd was growing, a mixture of office workers evacuating and curious onlookers drawn by catastrophe's magnetic pull. Sirens wailed in the distance, but distance meant minutes, and minutes meant everything. The Meridian Tower was one of the newer buildings in the city, all reflective glass and modern architecture, home to tech startups and financial firms, and, on the 23rd floor, the regional headquarters of Valencia Corporation, a pharmaceutical company that had made headlines 6 months ago when their new CEO had taken over amid scandal and restructuring. David pushed through the crowd, his construction-worn jeans and faded flannel shirt making him invisible among the suits and designer dresses. The building's main entrance was chaos. Security guards trying to manage the evacuation, people streaming out coughing and disoriented, someone crying into their phone about being unable to reach their boss. David slipped past them, moving against the tide, his eyes scanning for information. The elevators would be shut down. The stairwells would be packed with evacuees. But fire climbed, and smoke rose, and people trapped above the blaze would be running out of options fast. He grabbed a security guard's arm, a young guy, maybe 25, with panicked eyes and a radio clutched uselessly in his hand. "How many people are still up there?" David asked, his voice carrying the command of someone used to being obeyed in crisis. I don't know, man." The system went down. The fire started in the server room on 23 and spread fast. Some kind of electrical thing. The alarms didn't even... The guard's voice broke, overwhelmed. "Is the east stairwell clear?" David pressed, already knowing from the building's layout. He'd walked past this tower 1,000 times, had studied it the way he studied everything, mapping exits and weaknesses from habit, from training that never really left you. "I think so, but you can't go up there. The fire department." David was already moving. The east stairwell door was propped open, and he could hear the thunder of footsteps descending, people calling out to each other in fear and urgency. He pressed against the wall, climbing while others descended, his lungs already beginning to burn from the smoke that filtered down from above. By the 15th floor, the smoke was thicker. By the 20th, it was a living thing, gray and hot and hungry. David pulled his flannel shirt over his mouth and nose, breathing through the fabric, his eyes watering. The 23rd floor hallway was hell. Flames ate through the eastern offices, orange and furious, feeding on paper and particle board and the plastic veneer of corporate success. The sprinkler system had activated but was losing the battle, water hissing against fire in a futile rain. David moved low, his body remembering how to navigate through smoke, how to read a fire's mood and find the paths it hadn't yet claimed. He could hear someone screaming, no, not screaming, calling for help. A woman's voice, hoarse and desperate, coming from somewhere near what remained of the western offices. He found her behind a desk that had become an island in a sea of smoke and spreading flame. She was crouched low, a blazer pressed against her face. Her blonde hair darkened with sweat and soot. Her eyes widened when she saw him, shock and hope and disbelief all colliding in her expression. She was maybe 40, with the kind of polished appearance that came from boardrooms and power lunches, though right now she looked as terrified and human as anyone he'd ever pulled from danger. "I couldn't, the door," she gasped, gesturing toward the office entrance where flames now blocked the main path to the stairwell. "I know," David said, his voice steady, calm, the way his old lieutenants had been when everything was falling apart, but you needed to believe someone had a plan. "We're going out the window." "What?" "We're 23 floors up. There's a maintenance ledge that runs to the corner office. It connects to the north stairwell. 4 feet wide. We can make it." He didn't tell her that 4 feet felt like 4 inches when you were that high up with fire at your back. He didn't tell her that the ledge might not hold their combined weight, or that the north stairwell might already be compromised. He told her what she needed to hear to move, because moving meant living, and freezing meant the opposite. David kicked at the window with his steel-toed boot, a remnant from his construction job at the Morrison site across town. The job he'd been heading to before Maya's school drop-off, before the universe had put him in this place at this moment. The glass spiderwebbed, then shattered outward in a shower of glittering shards. October wind rushed in, feeding the fire behind them, making it roar with renewed hunger. "What's your name?" David asked, helping her to her feet. Her legs were shaking, and he could feel her hand trembling in his. "Victoria," she managed. "Victoria Marlowe." "David Sanders." "Nice to meet you, Victoria. Now, I need you to trust me. Okay? Don't look down. Look at me. Look at the ledge. 1 foot in front of the other." He climbed out first, his boots finding purchase on the concrete ledge that ran along the building's exterior. An architectural flourish that some designer had added for aesthetics, never imagining it might become a lifeline. The wind was stronger out here, tugging at his clothes, and the drop yawned below him like an open mouth. For a moment, David was back in the mountains of Kandahar, edging along a cliff face while mortar fire rained down. His team strung out behind him, trusting him to find the path that kept them alive. He reached back for Victoria, and she climbed out, her designer heels immediately catching on the window frame. "Lose the shoes," he said, and she kicked them off without hesitation, her stockinged feet finding the ledge. Behind them, fire erupted from the window they just left, a burst of orange that reached for them and fell short. "Move with me," David instructed, holding her hand, his other hand pressed flat against the building's glass exterior. "Slow, steady, breathe." They moved along the ledge like dancers in some terrible performance, each step measured, deliberate. Victoria was crying now, tears streaming down her soot-stained face, but she was moving, and that was what mattered. Below them, the crowd had spotted them, and a collective gasp rose up. More phones, more documentation, more strangers watching their survival or their death with equal fascination. David blocked it out, focused only on the next step, the next handhold, the way Victoria's breathing was starting to sync with his, finding a rhythm in the terror. The corner office window was intact, and David used his elbow to smash through it, ignoring the pain that shot up his arm as glass cut through his shirt and into his skin. He helped Victoria climb through first, then followed, and they were in a different office space, executive, judging by the mahogany desk and the view, and blessedly free of flames. The smoke was here too, but thinner, breathable. The door to the hallway was hot to the touch but not impossible, and beyond it, the north stairwell beckoned like salvation. They descended together, Victoria barefoot and limping, David's arm around her shoulders, supporting her weight as they joined the last stragglers evacuating the building. By the time they emerged into the October sunlight, fire trucks had arrived, their sirens wailing, firefighters in full gear rushing past them toward the blaze above. Paramedics descended immediately, separating David from Victoria, checking vitals, pressing oxygen masks to their faces, asking questions that seemed to come from very far away. David's eyes searched the crowd and found Maya standing with Mrs. Chen, the older woman's arm protective around his daughter's shoulders. Maya's face was streaked with tears, but when she saw him, she broke free and ran, and David caught her, lifting her up despite the paramedics' protests, holding her close while she sobbed into his neck. "I'm okay, baby," he murmured. "I'm okay. I'm right here." Over Maya's shoulder, David could see Victoria Marlowe standing 20 feet away, wrapped in a thermal blanket, staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly. Gratitude, maybe. But something else too, something that looked almost like recognition, though they'd never met before this morning, before fire and fear had turned them into reluctant partners in survival. A news crew had arrived, cameras rolling, and a reporter was trying to push through the paramedics toward him, microphone extended like a weapon. David turned away, holding Maya tighter, wanting nothing more than to disappear into the crowd, to take his daughter and go home to their small apartment, to leave this morning behind like a bad dream. But Victoria was still watching him, and something in her gaze suggested this wasn't over, that the smoke and fire had forged a connection that wouldn't be easily extinguished. The Meridian Tower burned for 3 more hours before firefighters brought it under control. But by then, David Sanders had already slipped away, just another face in the crowd, carrying his daughter toward the coffee shop where they would sit for a long time, drinking hot chocolate and not talking about what had just happened, because sometimes survival meant not looking back, not examining too closely the moments when the universe asked you to be more than you believed yourself capable of being. David's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a converted factory building in the South District, where rent was cheap enough for a single father working construction to afford. The walls were brick, exposed and honest, and Maya had covered them with drawings. Houses with triangle roofs and stick-figure families that always included 3 people, even though it had been just the 2 of them for 3 years now. The morning after the fire, David stood in their tiny kitchen making breakfast, his hands still wrapped in gauze from where the glass had cut him, moving through the familiar ritual of scrambled eggs and toast while Maya sat at their thrift store table, drawing a building with flames coming out the windows. "You don't have to draw that, sweetheart," David said gently, sliding a plate in front of her. Maya looked up, her crayon paused mid-stroke. "I'm drawing you saving people. That's what heroes do, right? They save people even when it's scary." David sat down across from her, his coffee mug warm between his bandaged hands. He wanted to tell her he wasn't a hero, that heroes were people who did extraordinary things, and what he'd done was just what needed to be done. What anyone would have done, except that wasn't true, was it? Most people had stood and watched. Most people had waited for someone else to act. And David had learned a long time ago, in a desert on the other side of the world, that waiting for someone else could mean the difference between life and death. "Heroes are just people who help when they can," David said finally. "And you're my hero, you know that? You ran to get Mrs. Chun. You did exactly what I asked you to do, even though you were scared. That takes courage." Maya smiled, the kind of sunshine-bright smile that made David's chest ache with love and fear in equal measure. She went back to her drawing, adding a small figure with a pink backpack standing safely on the ground, and David watched her, memorizing this moment, the way he tried to memorize all the good moments, storing them up against the nights when sleep wouldn't come and the past wouldn't stay buried. His phone buzzed on the counter, probably his foreman at the construction site, wondering where he was. David had called in sick, unable to face the questions, the congratulations, the way people would look at him differently. He'd seen the news last night, muting the volume but unable to look away as footage of him and Victoria on that ledge played on loop, the anchors calling him a good Samaritan and a mystery hero. The reporter had gotten his name from someone in the crowd, and now his phone was full of missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Voicemails from news outlets asking for interviews. Messages from old army buddies he hadn't heard from in years, saying they'd seen the footage and recognized his face. David deleted them all without listening. That life, the one where people knew his name and called him a hero, wasn't the life he'd chosen. He'd chosen quiet. He'd chosen normal. He'd chosen Maya's elementary school drop-offs and weekend trips to the library, and the kind of anonymous existence where the hardest decision of the day was whether to make spaghetti or tacos for dinner. After breakfast, they walked to Washington Park, the one with the old carousel and the duck pond where Maya liked to feed the geese with stale bread. It was Saturday, and the park was full of families, children shrieking with joy on the playground, parents chatting on benches with coffee cups warming their hands. David found their usual spot, a bench near the water with a view of the whole park, and watched as Maya ran to join a group of kids her age who were chasing each other around the merry-go-round. A woman sat down on the other end of the bench, and David glanced over, ready to offer a polite nod, then froze. Victoria Marlowe looked different in daylight, without the soot and terror. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup that he could see. She looked younger like this, and tired, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd slept as poorly as he had. "Mr. Sanders," she said, her voice softer than he remembered from yesterday's chaos. "Ms. Marlowe." David's posture shifted, became guarded. "How did you find me?" "The news had your name. A little research, a few calls. I hope you don't mind." She paused, studying him. "Actually, I know you do mind. I can see it in your face. But I needed to talk to you, and you weren't answering your phone." "I don't do interviews," David said flatly. "Good, because I'm not a reporter." Victoria turned to watch the children playing, her hands clasped in her lap. "I wanted to thank you properly. What you did yesterday, you saved my life. I would have died in that office if you hadn't come." "You're welcome, but you don't owe me anything." "I disagree." Victoria reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "I'd like to offer you a job at Valencia Corporation. We're rebuilding our offices, and we'll need security consultants. People who understand emergency response, crisis management. Your military background." "No." David stood up, his jaw tight. "I appreciate the offer, but no. I'm not interested." Victoria stood too, blocking his path as he tried to walk away. "Mr. Sanders, please, just listen. The pay would be triple what you're making now in construction. Full benefits. College fund for your daughter. I looked into you. I know you're working 2 jobs just to make rent. This could change things for both of you." David's hands clenched, the gauze tight against his healing cuts. "You looked into me? You have no right." "I'm sorry. You're right. That was invasive." Victoria's voice dropped, became earnest. "But I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a job because you're exactly the kind of person I need in my company. Someone who acts when others freeze. Someone with training, instinct, courage. Yesterday, you moved through that building like you'd done it 1,000 times before. Like you'd walked through fire and come out the other side." "I have walked through fire," David said quietly. "And I came home because I wanted to leave that behind. I have a daughter who needs a father, not a ghost who can't sleep at night because he's too busy remembering all the ways things can go wrong. I chose construction because it's simple, predictable, safe." "And yesterday?" Victoria challenged. "Was that predictable? Was that safe? Or was that you being exactly who you are, regardless of what job title you put on a time card?" David looked away, watching Maya on the swings, her legs pumping, her face tilted toward the sky. She was laughing, and the sound was the best thing in his world, the only thing that mattered. "My daughter comes first," he said. "Always. Any job, any opportunity. If it takes me away from her, if it puts her at risk, I'm not interested." "What if it gave her more?" Victoria asked. "Better schools, security, a future where she doesn't have to worry about whether Dad can make rent this month." "I'm not asking you to go overseas, Mr. Sanders. I'm not asking you to carry a rifle or put yourself in danger. I'm asking you to use what you know to help people, right here in this city, to help me build something better than what we had." David turned back to her, studying her face, seeing something there he recognized. The look of someone who'd survived something terrible and was trying to figure out what came next. "Why does this matter so much to you?" he asked. "You're the CEO of a major corporation. You could hire anyone." "Because I froze," Victoria said, and her voice cracked on the words. "Yesterday, when the fire started, when the smoke filled my office, I froze. I stood there like a deer in headlights while everything fell apart around me. And if you hadn't shown up, if you hadn't known exactly what to do, I would have died because I couldn't move. And I can't." She stopped, took a breath. "I can't be that person anymore. I can't be the CEO who freezes in a crisis. And I need people around me who don't freeze, who act." David saw Maya running toward them, her face flushed from playing, and he made a decision that surprised him even as he heard himself speak. "I'll think about it," he said. "Give me your number. I'll call you in a few days." Victoria's face lit up with something between relief and triumph. She pulled out a business card. Somehow she had new ones already, freshly printed despite yesterday's disaster, and pressed it into his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Sanders. That's all I'm asking. Just think about it." She left before Maya reached the bench, and David's daughter looked up at him with curious eyes. "Who was that lady, Daddy?" "Someone from yesterday," David said, tucking the business card into his pocket without looking at it. "Just someone saying thank you." But that night, after Maya was asleep, her nightlight casting star-shaped shadows on the ceiling of her small bedroom, David sat at their kitchen table and pulled out Victoria Marlowe's card. The paper was thick, expensive, embossed with the Valencia Corporation logo. On the back, she'd written a phone number in elegant script, and beneath it, 3 words, "Please consider it." David flipped the card between his fingers, thinking about triple pay and college funds and the way Maya's shoes were getting too small again. The way she never complained, but he could see her toes pressing against the worn canvas. He thought about construction sites in winter, his hands going numb in the cold, the constant ache in his lower back from lifting rebar and mixing concrete. He thought about his other job, stocking shelves at the grocery store 3 nights a week, coming home at midnight to fall into bed for 5 hours before Maya's alarm went off. But he also thought about the nightmares that still came sometimes, the ones where he was back in Kandahar or Helmand province, where smoke meant IEDs and gunfire, where every decision he made determined whether his squad came home or came home in boxes. He thought about the therapist at the VA who told him that avoiding triggers wasn't the same as healing, that choosing a safe life was just another kind of prison if it meant denying who he really was. David picked up his phone and stared at Victoria's number for a long time. Then he set the phone down and went to check on Maya one more time, adjusting her blankets, kissing her forehead, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. Tomorrow he'd call Victoria, or the day after, or maybe he'd throw the card away and pretend this conversation had never happened. But the card stayed on the kitchen table, and David stayed awake long into the night, caught between the person he'd been and the person he was trying to become, wondering if it was possible to be both, or if choosing meant losing something essential either way. The next morning was Sunday, and David took Maya to the Pancake House on Maple Street, their ritual after church, which they attended more for the community than any particular faith, but which Maya loved for the songs and the other kids in Sunday school. They sat in their usual booth, and the waitress, Doris, who'd been serving them for 2 years, brought Maya's chocolate chip pancakes without being asked, her eyes warm with grandmotherly affection. "Saw you on the news, honey," Doris said to David, refilling his coffee. "That was something, what you did. Real brave." David felt his face heat up, uncomfortable with the attention. "Just did what needed doing. That's what heroes always say," Doris replied, winking at Maya. "Your daddy's something special, sweet pea." After she left, Maya reached across the table and took David's hand, her fingers sticky with syrup. "Is it hard being brave, Daddy?" David thought about the question, about how to explain that bravery wasn't the absence of fear but the decision to act despite it, that every time he'd run toward danger instead of away, his heart had been pounding and his hands had been shaking and every instinct had screamed at him to save himself first. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But it's easier when you have someone to be brave for." You make me braver, Maya. Every single day. She smiled and went back to her pancakes, satisfied with the answer in the way children are, accepting profound truths without needing them complicated. David watched her eat and thought about all the moments that had led them here, from the day Maya was born to the day her mother left, unable to handle the weight of David's PTSD and the night terrors and the man who'd come back from war different than the boy who'd enlisted at 19. He thought about the custody battle he'd won not because he was perfect but because he showed up every day, present and trying, while Maya's mother had drifted further into addiction and instability until supervised visitation had become no visitation at all. David's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it, but it buzzed again and again, insistent. With a sigh, he pulled it out, expecting more media requests. Instead, it was a text from a number he recognized. Jackson Myers, who'd served with him in Afghanistan, who'd been his closest friend until David had come home and stopped answering calls. The message was simple. Saw what you did. Proud of you, brother. We should talk. It's been too long. David stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the reply button. Jackson represented everything David had left behind. The brotherhood, the purpose, the clarity that came from knowing your mission and your team and your place in a world that made a terrible kind of sense. But Jackson also represented the cost of that life. The friends who hadn't made it home. The decisions that haunted David in the dark hours before dawn. He closed the message without responding, the way he always did, and returned his attention to Maya, who was telling him an elaborate story about her friend Sophie's new kitten. This was real. This breakfast. This daughter. This life they'd built together from the wreckage of everything else. The past could stay in the past where it belonged. But Victoria Marlowe's business card was still in his pocket, and Jackson's message was still on his phone. And David was beginning to realize that no matter how hard he tried to build walls around his quiet life, the world had a way of finding the cracks and slipping through. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that made the city look washed out and tired. David dropped Maya at Riverside Elementary, watching through the rain-speckled windshield as she ran toward the entrance, her yellow raincoat bright against the concrete. He waited until she disappeared inside, then drove across town to the Morrison construction site, a half-finished apartment complex that was supposed to be luxury living but looked like every other rush development in the city's ongoing gentrification project. His foreman, Carlos Mendoza, was waiting at the trailer with his arms crossed and an expression that fell somewhere between annoyed and concerned. "You're late, Sanders. And you look like hell. Rough weekend." David grabbed his hard hat from the hook, ready to end the conversation, but Carlos stepped into his path. "Media's been calling here. Reporters wanting to talk to the hero of Meridian Tower." Carlos made air quotes with his fingers, his tone mocking but not unkind. "Word of advice? Don't let that go to your head. I've seen good workers turn into lazy prima donnas after their 15 minutes of fame." "Not interested in fame," David said, moving past him toward the site. "I'm here to work." The day was brutal. Rain made everything slippery and dangerous, and they were already behind schedule, which meant the developers were breathing down Carlos's neck, which meant Carlos was breathing down theirs. David spent 8 hours hauling materials, setting rebar, his muscles screaming, his bandaged hands aching inside his work gloves. The other crew members kept shooting him looks, some admiring, some resentful, all of them treating him differently than they had last week, when he'd just been another body pulling overtime. During lunch break, David sat alone in his truck, eating the sandwich he'd packed that morning. Peanut butter and jelly, the same lunch Maya had in her lunchbox, because groceries were tight this week. His phone buzzed with another call from an unknown number. He let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of him, and he listened to the message. "Mr. Sanders, this is Amanda Chun from Channel 7 News. We'd love to do a feature story on you. The everyday hero who risked his life to save a corporate CEO. We think our viewers would be really inspired by your story. Please call me back at..." David deleted the message mid-sentence. Then he pulled out Victoria Marlowe's business card, which had somehow migrated from his kitchen table to his wallet, though he didn't remember making the conscious decision to bring it with him. He stared at her handwritten note, "Please consider it," and thought about triple his current pay. Thought about Maya's college fund. Thought about not having to choose between fixing his truck's transmission and buying Maya new winter boots. He dialed the number before he could talk himself out of it. Victoria answered on the second ring, her voice professional but warm. "David, I was hoping you'd call. I have some questions," he said. "About the position. What exactly would I be doing?" They talked for 20 minutes, and David learned that Victoria's vision was bigger than he'd expected. She didn't just want a security consultant. She wanted someone to redesign Valencia's entire emergency response system, to train employees in crisis protocols, to work with city authorities on disaster preparedness. She wanted him to take everything he'd learned in the military and translate it into corporate safety, to create systems that would ensure what happened at Meridian Tower never happened again at any Valencia facility. "We have offices in 6 cities, Victoria explained. "You'd be based here, but there would be some travel. Nothing long-term. Maybe a week or 2 per quarter to train new staff and audit existing systems." "I have a daughter," David said immediately. "I can't be gone for weeks at a time. We'll work around your schedule. Bring her with you if you need to. Valencia will cover childcare, or we can arrange for travel during school breaks." "David, I'm not asking you to choose between this job and your family. I'm asking you to build something that lets you do both." After the call ended, David sat in his truck feeling like he'd just been offered a lifeline he wasn't sure he deserved. The money was real. Victoria had quoted him a salary that made his construction wage look like pocket change. The benefits were comprehensive health insurance that actually covered things: dental, vision, a 401k with company matching, and yes, a college fund for Maya that would start immediately. But there was something else in Victoria's voice, something that set off his instincts, the ones that had kept him alive in combat. She was driven, yes, determined, absolutely, but there was an edge of desperation beneath her professional veneer, a sense that this wasn't just about building better safety systems. This was personal for her in a way that went beyond gratitude for being rescued. David had learned to read people in war zones, where misreading someone's intentions could be fatal, and Victoria Marlowe was hiding something. Still, he found himself wanting to say yes, wanting to believe that maybe this was the universe offering him a chance to use his skills for something meaningful without having to carry a rifle or leave his daughter behind for months-long deployments. Maybe this was what healing looked like, not running from who he'd been, but finding a way to integrate that person with who he was now. That night, after Maya was asleep, David called his sister Rachel, who lived 3 states away with her husband and 2 kids. Rachel was the only family he had left who still talked to him regularly, who'd stood by him through the worst of his PTSD and the divorce and the long climb back to something resembling stability. "So you're actually considering it?" Rachel asked after he'd explained the job offer. "I think so. The money's good. Really good. And it's not military." It's not, Dad," Rachel finished softly. Their father had been career Army, 25 years, 3 tours, and he'd come home broken in ways that their mother had never been able to fix. He died when David was 17, officially a heart attack, but really the accumulated weight of too many things seen and done and carried alone. David had joined up 6 months after the funeral, chasing something he couldn't name, trying to understand the man his father had been. Instead, he'd become him. "Yeah," David admitted. "It's not that. But Ratch, what if I'm fooling myself? What if I take this job and it's too much? What if the travel becomes constant, or the responsibility triggers something, or I turn into a person Maya doesn't recognize again? Or what if," Rachel countered, "you take this job and you're brilliant at it? What if you help people, really help them in ways that matter? What if you show Maya that you can be who you are, all of who you are, and still be the dad she needs? David, you've spent 3 years trying to be small, trying to be invisible, trying to convince yourself that you're just some regular guy. But you're not. You never were. And maybe that's okay." After they hung up, David stood at Maya's bedroom door for a long time, watching her sleep. Her stuffed rabbit was tucked under her chin, and her dark hair spilled across the pillow like ink. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, so utterly dependent on him to make the right choices. The weight of that responsibility was crushing and precious in equal measure. The next morning, David called Victoria back and accepted the position. She asked him to come to the temporary Valencia offices that afternoon. They'd set up in a downtown building while repairs continued at Meridian Tower, to fill out paperwork and discuss start dates. David arranged for Mrs. Chun to pick up Maya from school, then drove across the city with a mixture of excitement and dread churning in his gut. The temporary offices were sleek and modern, full of expensive furniture and the kind of purposeful energy that came from people rebuilding after disaster. Victoria met him in the lobby, looking every inch the CEO in a tailored suit and heels, her hair styled, makeup perfect. She shook his hand with a firm grip and led him through a maze of cubicles to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Welcome to Valencia," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "I'm glad you decided to join us." The paperwork took an hour, and David's hand cramped from signing so many forms. Employment contracts, benefits elections, non-disclosure agreements, background check authorizations. When it was done, Victoria leaned back in her chair and studied him with those sharp blue eyes that seemed to see more than David was comfortable revealing. "I want to be honest with you," she said. "The fire at Meridian Tower wasn't an accident." David went very still. "What do you mean?" "The investigators found evidence of tampering with the electrical system. Someone deliberately caused that fire. And I believe they were targeting me." Victoria's voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her, fingers tightening around the arms of her chair. "6 months ago, I took over as CEO after the previous leadership was forced out in a scandal. Valencia had been involved in some questionable practices, manipulating clinical trial data, bribing FDA officials, price gouging life-saving medications. When the board brought me in, they knew I'd clean house. I fired 30% of senior management. I reversed policies that were hurting patients. I testified before Congress about industry corruption. And you made enemies," David said quietly. "Powerful ones. People who lost money, lost careers, lost the ability to keep exploiting a broken system." Victoria stood and walked to the window, her silhouette dark against the bright sky. "The fire department hasn't made their findings public yet. They're still investigating. But someone wanted me dead, David. And when you pulled me out of that building, you didn't just save my life. You made yourself visible to whoever did this." David felt cold wash through him, that familiar combat awareness kicking in, the way the world suddenly sharpened and slowed when threat became real. "Why didn't you tell me this before I accepted the job? Would you have taken it if I had?" Victoria turned to face him. "Would you have let me put you and your daughter at risk?" "No," David admitted. "I would have walked away." "Exactly. And I needed you too much to let that happen." She crossed back to the desk, leaning against it, her posture both vulnerable and challenging. "I know what you're thinking, that I manipulated you, that I should have given you all the information up front. And you're right. But David, I'm terrified. Someone tried to kill me and they might try again. I need people around me who know how to handle danger, who don't freeze when things go wrong, who can protect not just me, but everyone who works for this company." David stood, his jaw tight. "I have a 7-year-old daughter. I can't." "I've already arranged for security," Victoria interrupted. "For both of you. Discreet, professional. They'll maintain distance, but they'll be there. And if you want out, if this is too much, I understand. I'll pay you a severance equal to 6 months' salary for the time I wasted and the risk I put you in without your knowledge. 6 months' salary for nothing." David could take the money and walk away, go back to construction, to his simple life, to pretending he was someone he wasn't. It would be the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice that protected Maya from the ugliness that seemed to follow him no matter how hard he tried to outrun it. But he thought about Victoria frozen in that office, about all the other people who'd been in Meridian Tower when the fire started, about whoever had set that blaze being out there right now, unpunished, possibly planning their next move. He thought about the kind of person who would burn down a building full of innocent people just to kill one woman who'd tried to do the right thing. "I need to know everything," David said. "Every enemy you've made, every threat you've received, every suspicion you have about who might be behind this. And I need to talk to your security team, your IT department, anyone who has access to information about your schedule and movements. If I'm going to do this job, I'm going to do it right." Victoria's face showed relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you, David." "Don't thank me yet." David replied grimly. If someone's trying to kill you, we're gonna find out who and stop them. But that means you need to trust me completely. No more secrets. No more withholding information. If we're in this together, we're all the way in. They spent the next 3 hours going through everything. Victoria had received dozens of threatening emails since taking over as CEO, most of them from angry investors or dismissed employees. Her predecessor, Martin Hargrove, had been particularly hostile, sending increasingly unhinged messages about how she destroyed his legacy and would pay for her betrayal. There was also Marcus Chen, the former chief financial officer who'd been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for his role in the bribery scheme, and who'd vowed in court that Victoria would regret the day she testified against him. But the most troubling information came from Victoria's head of security, a former FBI agent named Richard Torres, who joined the meeting halfway through. Torres was in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of quiet competence that David recognized from officers he'd respected in the military. We've had 3 incidents in the past 2 months, Torres explained, spreading photos across the conference table. Someone broke into Ms. Marlowe's home office and copied files from her computer. Someone tampered with her car, cut the brake lines, made it look like mechanical failure. And 2 weeks before the fire, someone sent a package to her home address containing a dead rat and a note that said, "Traitors get what they deserve." David studied the photos, his mind cataloging details, patterns, the signature of someone who was escalating. "And you didn't increase security after the brake line incident?" "I recommended it," Torres said, his voice tight with frustration. Ms. Marlowe declined. Victoria had the grace to look embarrassed. "I thought they were trying to scare me. I didn't think they'd actually try to burn you alive in your office," David finished. With respect, that was naive. These people aren't playing games. They're committed, organized, and they're getting bolder. He turned to Torres. "I need everything you have. Security footage from the building. Employment records for anyone who had access to the server room where the fire started. Background checks on cleaning staff, maintenance workers, anyone who could have gotten in after hours. And I need to know who knew Victoria would be working late that night. Who had access to her schedule." Torres pulled out a tablet and started making notes. Her assistant, her executive team, the board members, building security, probably 20 people total. "Start with anyone who's been recently terminated or passed over for promotion," David instructed. "Cross-reference with anyone who has technical skills that would allow them to bypass security or manipulate electrical systems. Look for connections to Hargrove or Chen, or anyone else with a grudge against Victoria or Valencia." They worked until evening, and by the time David left to pick up Maya from Mrs. Chen's apartment, his head was swimming with information and his instincts were screaming that they were missing something crucial. Someone had planned the Meridian Tower fire carefully, had known exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage while making it look accidental. That level of sophistication suggested either professional help or inside knowledge, possibly both. Maya was full of stories about her day when David picked her up, chattering about art class and the field trip permission slip he needed to sign for the Science Museum visit next month. David listened with half his attention, the other half scanning the street for anything unusual, his body tense with the awareness that someone dangerous was out there, someone who now knew his face from the news coverage, someone who might see him as a threat or an obstacle. At dinner, spaghetti, Maya's favorite, his daughter finally noticed his distraction. "Daddy, are you okay? You look worried." David forced himself to smile, to be present. "Just thinking about work stuff, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." "Is it about the lady you saved? The one from the park?" "Smart kid. Too smart sometimes." "Yeah, actually. I'm going to be working with her company now, helping them be safer." Maya considered this, twirling spaghetti on her fork. "That's good. Everyone should be safe." Then, with the frightening perceptiveness of children, "Are we safe, Daddy?" David reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Always. I promise you, Maya. I will always keep you safe." It was a promise he'd made before, and one he intended to keep, no matter what it cost him. The next morning, David drove Maya to school and noticed the black SUV following them 3 cars back. Torres's security team, keeping their distance but visible enough that David would know they were there. It should have been reassuring, but instead it made everything feel more real, more dangerous. His daughter was now part of a game he'd never wanted to play again, and the thought made his hands tighten on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. After drop-off, David went to Valencia's temporary offices and began his real work. Torres had assembled a conference room full of files and 3 junior security analysts who looked at David with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. He could see the question in their eyes. Who is this construction worker to tell us how to do our jobs? David didn't waste time with pleasantries. Someone tried to murder your CEO by burning down a building full of innocent people. That tells us they're ruthless, they're desperate, and they don't care about collateral damage. Our job is to figure out who they are before they try again, and to make sure if they do try, they fail. Questions? One of the analysts, a young woman named Sarah Kim, raised her hand tentatively. We've already been over all the obvious suspects. Hargrove has an alibi for the night of the fire. He was at a charity gala with 200 witnesses. Chun is in federal prison. The terminated employees have all been interviewed by police and cleared. Then we're looking at someone who's been more careful, David said. Someone who's been planning this for months, building toward it. Torres, pull up the timeline of incidents again. They spent the day building a profile of their suspect. Someone with technical skills or access to someone with those skills. Someone with detailed knowledge of Valencia's operations and Victoria's schedule. Someone patient enough to escalate slowly, harassment, property damage, attempted murder, testing security responses, learning patterns. Someone with resources, because professional arson wasn't cheap or easy to arrange. What about corporate competitors? David asked. Other pharmaceutical companies that might benefit from Valencia's downfall? Torres shook his head. Victoria's reforms have been good for the industry's reputation. Most competitors have publicly supported her changes. Publicly, David emphasized. What about privately? What about companies that were counting on Valencia maintaining the old corrupt practices so they could justify their own? Or suppliers who were getting kickbacks under the old regime? Sarah pulled up a list of Valencia's contractors and suppliers, and they began the tedious work of investigation, cross-referencing financial records, looking for unusual patterns or connections. Hours blurred together, and David was so focused he didn't notice Victoria enter the room until she spoke. You all should go home, she said. It's almost 8 o'clock. David looked up, startled, and realized the windows showed darkness outside. He'd missed dinner with Maya, missed bedtime, had texted Mrs. Chun to ask her to stay with his daughter without really thinking about what that meant. How it felt like the beginning of a pattern he'd sworn he wouldn't repeat. The analysts filed out, but David stayed, studying the timeline they'd built on the whiteboard, notes and photos and red string connecting possible suspects like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Victoria came to stand beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something floral and expensive that seemed out of place in the fluorescent-lit conference room. You're good at this, she observed. You see connections other people miss. It's just pattern recognition, David said dismissively. Anyone trained in intelligence gathering could do it. But you're not just anyone, Victoria replied. Torres told me you ran through that building like you had a map in your head. Like you could see the fire's path before it spread. That's not training. That's gift. David turned to face her, uncomfortable with the admiration in her voice. I need to go. My daughter is fine. Mrs. Chun texted me an update an hour ago. Maya had chicken nuggets for dinner, finished her homework, and went to bed at 7:30. Victoria held up her phone, showing the message. I asked Mrs. Chun to keep me informed. I know this job is demanding, and I know it's pulling you away from Maya more than you'd like. So I've arranged for a full-time nanny, someone vetted by our security team, who can help with school pickups and bedtime when you're working late. I don't need a nanny, David said flatly. I need to be there for my daughter. You're there for her every day, Victoria countered. But David, you're also here doing something important, something that could save lives. You can't be everywhere at once, and you shouldn't have to choose between being a father and being good at your job. Let me help you, please. It was the please that got him, the vulnerability in her voice that reminded David that Victoria wasn't just his boss. She was someone who'd almost died, who was living with a target on her back, who'd chosen to fight instead of hide even though fighting meant putting other people like him, at risk. 1-month trial, David said finally. If Maya's not comfortable with the nanny, or if I feel like it's not working, we go back to our original arrangement. Victoria's smile was bright with relief. Thank you. You won't regret this. But as David drove home through dark streets, checking his rearview mirror for the security SUV that followed at a discreet distance, he wondered if that was true. If taking this job, if getting involved in Victoria's war against whoever was trying to destroy her, was something he'd eventually regret. If the cost of trying to help would be measured in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Maya was asleep when he got home, and David stood in her doorway watching her breathe, memorizing the curve of her cheek and the way her hand curled around her stuffed rabbit. He'd survived war zones and firefights and the aftermath of trauma that had nearly destroyed him. But nothing scared him as much as the thought of failing this child, of letting his choices put her in danger. I'm keeping you safe, he whispered into the darkness. No matter what, I promise. It was a promise he meant with every fiber of his being. And in the days to come, it would be tested in ways he couldn't have predicted. The nanny arrived 2 days later. Her name was Patricia Donovan, 53 years old, former elementary school teacher, background check pristine, references glowing. Maya took to her immediately, drawn by Patricia's warm laugh and the way she knew all the songs from Maya's favorite movies. David wanted to resent her, wanted to feel territorial about someone else tucking his daughter in at night, but Patricia made it impossible. She was competent without being intrusive, caring without trying to replace him, and she had the good sense to step back whenever David came home, letting him reclaim his role without awkwardness. With Patricia handling the logistics of Maya's daily routine, David threw himself into the investigation with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He and Torres's team reviewed thousands of hours of security footage, interviewed dozens of employees, and built an increasingly complex web of connections and possibilities. They discovered that the fire had started from a sophisticated timing device hidden in the electrical panel, not the work of an amateur. Whoever built this knew what they were doing, Torres said, showing David photos from the fire marshal's report. Military grade or close to it, the kind of thing you'd need specialized training to construct. David studied the images, his mind racing. What about Valencia's competitors? Any of them have employees with military backgrounds, specifically demolitions or engineering? Sarah pulled up a database and started searching. Zenith Pharmaceuticals has a VP of operations who was Army EOD explosive ordnance disposal. Marcus Hendricks, 47, left the service 10 years ago. And his connection to Valencia? David asked. Zenith was one of the companies that submitted a buyout offer when Valencia's stock tanked during the scandal. Torres said slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Victoria turned them down, said she was going to rebuild Valencia, not sell it for parts. David felt something click into place, that instinct he'd learned to trust in combat. Pull everything on Hendricks. Financial records, travel history, communications, and find out if he has any connection to Hargrove or Chun. Took 3 days of digging, but they found it. Marcus Hendricks and Martin Hargrove had served together in the same Army unit 20 years ago. They'd stayed in touch after their service, golfed together at the same country club, sat on the board of a veterans charity organization. It wasn't proof, but it was a thread, and threads could be pulled until they unraveled entire conspiracies. We need to bring this to the police, Torres said. Let them handle the investigation. No, Victoria said, entering the conference room with 2 cups of coffee, one of which she handed to David. If we tip our hand now, Hendricks will know we're onto him. He'll disappear, or worse, he'll accelerate his plans. We need more evidence. Something concrete. David took a sip of coffee, thinking, we need to set a trap. Make Hendricks think he has another opportunity to get to you, but under controlled circumstances where we can catch him in the act. You want to use me as bait, Victoria said, and there was no fear in her voice, only grim determination. I want to end this, David replied. before someone else gets hurt. They spent the next week planning, and David felt the familiar weight of command settling over him, the clarity that came from having a mission and the skills to execute it. He'd forgotten what this felt like, the way his mind sharpened in crisis, the way his body remembered what it had been trained to do even after years of trying to forget. But at night, when he came home to Maya and Patricia's cheerful updates about spelling tests and playground friendships, David felt the dissonance between his two worlds. He was becoming someone his daughter didn't fully recognize. Distracted, intense, carrying a weight she was too young to understand. And that scared him more than any threat Hendrix might pose. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Victoria would attend a pharmaceutical industry conference at the Grandview Hotel downtown, giving a keynote speech about ethical practices and transparency, exactly the kind of high-profile event that would draw media attention and, they hoped, draw Hendrix into making his move. David had spent days working with Torres to secure the venue, mapping every entrance and exit, placing undercover security throughout the building, installing additional cameras in blind spots. The night before the conference, David couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind running through every possible scenario, every way things could go wrong. At 2 a.m, he gave up and went to check on Maya. She was sprawled across her bed like a starfish, covers kicked off, her rabbit clutched in one hand. David tucked the blanket around her and sat on the edge of the bed, watching her sleep. "Daddy." Maya's voice was sleepy, confused. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, baby. Just checking on you. Go back to sleep." But Maya sat up, rubbing her eyes, suddenly more awake. "You've been sad lately, and scared. I can tell." David's throat tightened. He'd thought he was hiding it better, thought his daughter was too young to see through his careful facade. "I'm not scared, sweetheart. I'm just working on something important, something that's taking up a lot of my thoughts." "Is it dangerous?" Maya asked, and her eyes were too knowing, too worried for a 7-year-old. David wanted to lie, but he'd promised himself he would always be honest with his daughter, that she would never wonder if she could trust his words. "It might be, but I'm being very careful, and I have a lot of people helping me to stay safe." Maya was quiet for a moment, then she reached out and put her small hand on his cheek. "You're a good daddy," she said. "Even when you're busy, even when you're worried, you're still a good daddy." David pulled her into a hug, his eyes burning with tears he wouldn't let fall. "You're the best thing in my whole life, Maya Sanders. You know that?" "I know," she said, and she sounded so certain, so secure in his love despite everything, that David felt something in his chest crack open. He'd been so afraid that taking this job, getting involved in Victoria's problems, would damage his relationship with his daughter. But maybe Rachel had been right. Maybe showing Maya that he could be all of who he was, protector, warrior, father, was better than trying to be someone smaller, someone safer, someone less. The conference began at 9 the next morning. David arrived at the Grandview at dawn, doing a final walkthrough with Torres and his team. Victoria's speech was scheduled for 2 p.m., prime time for maximum attendance and media coverage. If Hendrix was going to make his move, it would be then, when Victoria was most visible, most vulnerable, standing on that stage in front of hundreds of witnesses. David positioned himself backstage, wearing a radio earpiece that kept him connected to the security team spread throughout the hotel. He'd insisted on a metal detector at every entrance, thorough bag checks, security personnel disguised as hotel staff and conference attendees. If a threat came, they would be ready. Victoria found him an hour before her speech, looking elegant in a navy suit, her blonde hair styled in soft waves. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, and for the first time since David had met her, he saw real fear in her eyes. "No," David admitted, "but I'm sure that we need to end this, and I'm sure that I won't let anything happen to you." "Why?" Victoria asked suddenly. "Why are you risking so much for me? You barely know me. This isn't your fight." David thought about that, about why he'd said yes to this job, why he'd thrown himself into this investigation with an intensity that had surprised even him. "You asked me once why I ran into that burning building," he said slowly. "And the truth is, I don't know how not to. When someone needs help, when I have the skills and the training and the ability to do something, I can't just walk away. My daughter asks me sometimes what makes someone a hero, and I tell her heroes are just people who help when they can. This is me helping. You're a better man than most, Victoria said softly. I'm just a man trying to do the right thing, David replied. Now go. Give your speech. Make it count. Show them why someone was willing to burn down a building to silence you. The auditorium filled quickly, hundreds of pharmaceutical executives and industry professionals taking their seats, the air buzzing with conversation and the click of laptop keys. David watched from the wings as Victoria took the stage, commanding immediate attention with her presence and her voice. 6 months ago, she began, I took over as CEO of a company that had lost its way. Valencia Pharmaceuticals had become everything wrong with our industry, prioritizing profit over patients, manipulating data, bribing officials, price gouging people who needed our medications to survive. And I stood before the board and promised them I would fix it, that I would make Valencia a company we could all be proud of again. She was magnificent, David thought, powerful and passionate and utterly unafraid, even though she knew someone in this room or watching from outside might be planning her death. She talked about the reforms she'd implemented, the executives she'd fired, the testimony she'd given that had sent people to prison. She talked about the fire at Meridian Tower, about how someone had tried to kill her to prevent her from continuing this work. But here's what they didn't understand, Victoria said, her voice ringing through the auditorium. You can't kill an idea whose time has come. You can't silence truth by burning buildings or making threats. Because for every person who wants to maintain a corrupt system, there are 10 more who are ready to fight for something better. And I'm not fighting alone. The speech lasted 45 minutes, and David's eyes never stopped moving, scanning the crowd, watching for anything unusual. A suspicious movement, someone reaching into a bag, a face that didn't belong. His radio crackled with constant updates from Torres's team positioned throughout the building. Second floor clear. North entrance secure. VIP section showing normal activity. And then, just as Victoria was wrapping up her speech, a different voice on the radio, sharp with urgency. Torres to Sanders. We have a suspicious package in the parking garage, level 3. Near Ms. Marlowe's vehicle. David's blood turned to ice. Evacuate the building. Now. Copy that. Initiating evacuation protocol. David Sanders was an ordinary construction worker and single father, doing his best to raise his young daughter Maya after losing his wife. Working on a renovation project at Meridian Tower, David's world changed when fire erupted through the building one October evening. While everyone else fled, David's military training kicked in, instincts he tried to bury since leaving Afghanistan. He ran toward the danger, not away from it. On the 15th floor, he found Victoria Marlowe, Valencia Corporation's CEO, frozen in terror as flames consumed her office. David guided her through the smoke-filled corridors, but their escape route was blocked. With no other options, they climbed onto an exterior ledge, 15 stories above the street, with fire raging behind them and a deadly drop ahead. Through David's calm guidance and unwavering determination, they survived long enough for firefighters to reach them. The rescue made headlines, thrusting David and Maya into an unwanted spotlight. Victoria, deeply grateful and recognizing David's unique skills, offered him a position as her personal security consultant. Despite his reluctance to return to anything resembling his military past, David accepted. He needed the job and Maya needed stability. As David integrated into Victoria's world, investigating the fire's origins, a disturbing truth emerged. The fire wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately tried to kill Victoria Marlowe. A young employee, Rebecca Chin, had died in that fire, collateral damage in someone's murderous plot. David's investigation revealed a web of corporate corruption. Victoria had recently exposed massive fraud at Valencia under her predecessor, Martin Hargrove, rejecting a lucrative buyout offer from Zenith Capital in the process. Someone wanted revenge, and they weren't finished. The threats escalated. Suspicious accidents, near misses, and a disturbing pattern emerged. With help from FBI agent Torres, David worked frantically to identify the threat before the killer struck again. The conspiracy pointed toward Marcus Hendricks, a Zenith Capital executive whose career had imploded after Victoria's refusal to sell Valencia. Everything came to a head during a major conference where Victoria was speaking. A bomb threat forced an evacuation, but it was a decoy. Hendricks had orchestrated an elaborate trap, force Victoria into a protected vehicle, then track and intercept it. The plan worked horrifically well. A violent collision sent their SUV spinning, flipping, leaving the driver dead and Agent Torres injured. As David and Victoria crawled from the wreckage, Marcus Hendricks appeared with a gun, ready to execute his plan and frame David as an obsessed stalker who'd caused the tragedy. In the confrontation, Hendricks revealed everything. His rage at Victoria for destroying the Valencia deal, his willingness to kill anyone who stood in his way, his complete lack of remorse for Rebecca Chen's death. When he raised his weapon, David did what he'd always done. Put himself between danger and the people he protected. David took a bullet to the shoulder, but Agent Torres's shot brought Hendricks down. Both men survived, and Hendricks, faced with overwhelming evidence, confessed to everything. Martin Hargrove was arrested as an accomplice, and Rebecca Chen's family finally had answers about their daughter's death. During David's week-long hospital stay, something shifted. His conversations with Victoria deepened beyond professional courtesy. She saw in him not just a protector, but someone who understood trauma, survival, and the weight of responsibility. He saw in her not just a client, but someone genuinely trying to do right, to honor the lives lost, to build something better from the ashes. When David returned to Valencia 6 weeks later, it was as Director of Crisis Management, with a team dedicated to ensuring such tragedies never happened again. He traveled the country implementing emergency response systems, training employees, turning his painful experiences into protection for others. But the real transformation was internal. David had spent years running from his military past, trying to be just a father, just a construction worker, anything but the soldier he'd been. The fire forced him to confront a truth. He couldn't separate those parts of himself. His training, his trauma, his instincts, they were all pieces of who he was. Maya, his wise and resilient daughter, understood before he did. Heroes use their scary stuff to help people, she told him one day in the park. In her simple, childlike wisdom was a profound truth. Healing didn't mean forgetting, strength didn't mean being fearless, and being a hero was simply showing up when people needed you. 6 months after the shooting, David found himself at peace. He had meaningful work that honored both who he'd been and who he wanted to be. He had Maya, whose laughter and love reminded him why everything mattered. He had Patricia, their nanny, who'd become family. And he had purpose, using every hard lesson, every scar, every nightmare to make the world a little safer. The sky above was clear and bright, free of smoke and ash, full of possibility. David Sanders had learned that you didn't have to choose between your past and your future, between the soldier and the father, between the trauma and the healing. You could be all of it, carry all of it, and still walk forward into the light. Thank you for listening to this incredible story of courage and redemption. If David and Maya's journey touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next story of heroes who rise when it matters most. Your support helps us share these powerful narratives of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable human spirit. Subscribe today.